So given that the Elimination Chamber is but a few days away or a week away, or depending when you watch this, it could be a whole year away, I thought I would sit down, watch a bunch of matches. So yeah, my name is Simon Miller, and here's my 10 favourite Elimination Chamber matches ever. Now, as always with this like this, of course, it's going to change, but in at number 10 is the Elimination Chamber 2012, which was Daniel Bryan versus Wade Barrett versus Cody Rhodes versus The Big Show versus The Great Khali versus Santino Marella. Now, this one is a little bit ridiculous, but it all comes down to the last two, and the match itself is fine. I mean, it's your traditional and expected Elimination Chamber, but Daniel Bryan, who is the champion at the time, is in there, so you assume he's going to win, but the person he is facing after everybody else has been eliminated in the chamber, hence the name, is Santino Marella. Now, of course, Santino is mostly remembered for being one of the best comedy characters in wrestling ever, or at least that's how I see him. But for whatever reason, I would guess because he was so beloved and Daniel Bryan was so hated in 2012, everybody is going nuts for Santino. And the near fall they do after the Cobra is just the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I said it then, I've said it at some point over the last 10 years, I shall say it again now. I think WWE could have pulled the trigger here and had Santino just lost that belt back on Monday night, because it would have been ridiculous for obvious reasons, but the pop he would have received, again, it's just from nowhere. It's not like before this, all of a sudden he had got mega super duper over. He, of course, was over because he was so entertaining. But on this night, it's just when fans have decided, you know what, we're here to have a good time. We don't like you, we really like you, and we are going to try and cheer our way all the way to Success Town. And, I mean, the only way you could have done this would have been Vince McMahon from the gorilla position calling an audible to the referee, which is unlikely going to happen in a company as big as WWE. But when you get to these last two, the rest doesn't even matter. I mean, again, I've got all my notes up here. The Great Khali is in the match. I don't want to be disparaging to the Great Khali. He made it to the big time, so you can't get too angry at him. He ain't very good. He can barely walk, and that tree slam he hits people with, oh my gosh, it's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life, as people just fall on their necks. But if wrestling is all about moments, I go back and watch this all the time just because I love how much Santino is embraced by the loud crowd. He doesn't win, and when Daniel Bryan does retain his championship, so mad. And that's what wrestling should be about, right? It should be about emotion. So yes, the work, to call it that, it's not bad. It's totally fine. And of course, there are much better Elimination Chamber matches that I haven't included here from that vantage point. But I want to be entertained, and I just want to sit down and enjoy myself. I would absolutely go to Elimination Chamber 2012. And at number 9, we have the Elimination Chamber from 2010, which is CM Punk versus The Undertaker versus R-Truth versus John Morrison versus Chris Jericho versus flipping Rey Mysterio. Now, once again, this actually comes down to moments and stories, although this is also the evening when somebody, a pyrotechnic dude, decided they would try and kill Mark Calloway. So when The Undertaker is trying to get to the ring, and he has spoken about this a lot on his podcast and other interviews that he's done, a few weeks before this, he had told them, listen, the fire is too close to me, back it off. For whatever reason, they didn't listen to him, and he quite literally gets set on fire. Now, again, we're all aware of what The Undertaker's wrestling entrance is. There ain't no way he's faking this. You can see it live and in person. He totally freaks out. And I think he also went on to say in one of those interviews that if he hadn't have changed the coat for the coat he's wearing there, which is this big, thick leather thing, who the flub knows what would have happened. And for the whole match, he's in the corner, non-stop moving because his skin is burning, as referees just give him bottle of water and bottle of water after bottle of water. Now, that doesn't increase the interest of the match, but it's absolutely a caveat you have to point out there, because how the flub did he do this? And he was the world champion as well. But also, the reason I put it at number 9 is because of The Undertaker, because this was leading into the WrestleMania where Shawn Michaels had lost to him the year before and said, Undertaker, I want to take you on again. And he'd entered the Royal Rumble, and one of the greatest Royal Rumble eliminations ever, when he tries to hold on to the rope and he goes, because of course, Shawn Michaels is just trying to find a path back to taking on The Undertaker at the show of shows. So just as it's The Undertaker, Chris Jericho, right, as the last two, Shawn Michaels just appears from beneath the ring. Or no, he appears from beneath one of the greats, which means he was there before the Elimination Chamber even got built. He super kicks The Undertaker, costs him his world title. Chris Jericho becomes the champion, which is a big shock. I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card. But it also set up that round 2 at WrestleMania. It is just so good. And you also have CM Punk in straight edge society mode here. He cuts a flipping promo to the ring saying R-Truth's a piece of trash. He eliminates him quite quickly. And that is one of the best runs that the round 1 of CM Punk ever had in WWE. So there's just so much to it. Again, you have the Undertaker Shawn Michaels story, brilliant. The CM Punk promo is like he did in the Royal Rumble too. It just makes it feel a little bit different. And then you have Jericho winning, which is the surprise. So there are lulls in this, and maybe it's not as violent, as brutal as other ones. I just find it incredibly enjoyable, and I love everything. It's been long enough, right? This was 15 years ago as I record this. Somebody should be like, I want to face you at WrestleMania. No, you ain't getting it. And they go through these absolutely crazy route in order to piss the other person off so much that, like, all right, fine, you've ruined my life, now I will kill you at WrestleMania. So it's just really fun. Again, it's all going to depend on what you want from a match, but the Elimination Chamber is a massive gimmick anyway. So if you can sort of build in more of those, quite clearly, I am your audience. And in at number 8, it's No Way Out 2008, which is Triple H versus Chris Jericho versus Jeff Hardy versus Umaga versus JBL versus Shawn Michaels. So there's 2 reasons I think this is probably improved now as compared to what it was back then. Firstly, it reminds you of how over Jeff Hardy was. It's no wonder, even with all his personal issues, WWE were like, we have to make him the world champion. I think Jeff in an interview said recently that if he had sort of kept on the straight and narrow, he probably could have been a bigger star as John Cena. I think there's an argument for it. I mean, you can argue he's being arrogant or it's a crazy thing to say. That's totally up to you. But when I watch this, people are so desperate for Jeff Hardy to win. Like, they love this guy. They will bleed for this guy. They will die for this guy. I can totally see where he's coming from. But the flip side to that is, of course, Umaga is in this, who very sadly has passed away. And I don't think it was, well, it was quite a few years after this, but it's been a long time ago now. And man, this is just when they figured it out. They knew exactly how to present this guy. I suppose it is quite similar to Jacob Fatu in 2025, but he is smashing people through the pods. He is wrecking people. He does a double Samoan drop at one point, and it's totally fine because he is Samoan. It's no wonder. I can't remember where the John Cena Extreme Rules match was. Maybe it was this year or sometime around it. But there really was a point with this Umaga character, even though in terms of the gimmick itself, felt like it had come from like 20 years ago. It felt completely out of date. But the way he embraced it and his in-ring work, I tell you, man, that Anoa'i family is totally crazy, or that Bloodline family, whichever one he fits into. There's so many of them. It's no wonder there is a lineage there because it's absolutely incredible. There's also so much blood and so much violence. And I do think you have to factor that in to a degree. Because like, if you sit down to watch a comedy show, you expect to laugh. And if you sit down to watch an Elimination Chamber, I'm sure there is an expectation, oh my gosh, this could get out of control. And not every single Elimination Chamber does that. But also, I think it's the first one, or it has to be at least one of the early ones, when they're not fighting for a championship anymore and they're fighting for an opportunity to take on a title holder at WrestleMania, which of course was going to tie into the Royal Rumble story, and WWE was going to run with that for a long time. So you can argue that it's a little bit on the nose, but I do like it here, I guess, because you can sit there from an historical standpoint, go, oh my gosh, I understand. And you do get a few swerves as well, because Triple H takes out Shawn Michaels here, and I think Triple H went on to win it. I'm getting confused now. I watched all of these like en masse the other day, and now they're all bleeding into one. So some of it is a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Generic, I suppose. Like, there's a big lull, because of course these matches go long, so you have to wait for the lights to flash and go dun 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 dun. Oh, you can go now. But I think there's enough beats in it, and again, towards the end, it just gets so brutal that you do find yourself being pulled in. And for me, again, I'm talking, I could probably change tomorrow, right, depending on my brain chemistry. But watching Jeff Hardy and Umaga, I argue in their prime, really is pretty something special. And at number 7, it's New Year's Revolution 2005. Triple H versus Batista versus Randy Orton versus Chris Jericho versus Edge versus Chris Benoit. The straight away is the star power, right? And again, when you go back and watch things today, it's the opposite of recency bias. You are going to be flooding in nostalgia as it just hit your nostalgia gland right in the tum-tum, because it's wonderful. And in the way we're approaching these matches, you do start to go, man, Triple H was in a lot of these. And that kind of ties in here too, because of course this is when Evolution was sort of in their pomp I should say. And by the next year, as heading into WrestleMania 21, it was going to be Batista versus Triple H. Obviously Randy Orton's in this too, and he'd fallen out with those guys as well. So there is a lot to love about it, in the sense you can watch it and know where they're going, and that just gives it a bit more story, it gives it a bit more narrative. But it's also during a time when, what was it, 2005? So yes, I think that's fair. Edge and Chris Jericho, I think, were trying to make a proper play for, we should be proper main eventers, man. You need to give us a push. And man, do they go out there and give evidence to the jury. They just carry all the in-ring work here, and they're so good. I don't mean this as disparagingly as it is. I just mean it factually. Of course they're a bit slower now, and of course they're not as good just because that time does that to everybody. And they're still amazing for their age. I think we do forget that. They're in their 50s. But when you go back to when they're sort of in their super-duper prime, it's no wonder they're still going, and it's no wonder they have the fan support they do have, because they're pretty damn good. It's another one where there was just so much blood and so much violence, which is kind of funny, but I guess it was pre-WWE going PG, so they're able to get away with this. And because they love shenanigans both then and now, Shawn Michaels is the referee, and he just gets pissed off with Edge at one point, super kicks him, and that takes out the Rated R superstar, and again, ties into other things we've talked about. I just like story nuggets like that. It pleases me for whatever reason. Obviously, Triple H and Batista are looking at each other the whole time as well, as we've kind of touched upon, and I just think it's well put together, but also I think it's the level of talent in the damn thing. Like, you could put all of them in the Hall of Fame. I struggled to talk about Chris Benoit today. We've talked about this on the video, so I won't bore you with it again. But Triple H, Batista, Randy, and Chris Jericho, Edge. I mean, Chris Jericho has said he doesn't want to go in the Hall of Fame, but one day they'll probably do it anyway because he is of that class. And of course, we've been trying to get Dave Batista in now for about 5 years. But again, it's one of those ones, maybe it's aged well. I can't remember what the reaction was at the time. I did look around, I was like, man, that's pretty damn good. Now, with number 6, we actually jumped to Elimination Chamber 2014. Randy Orton versus Christian versus Daniel Bryan versus Cesaro versus Sheamus versus Cena. Now, huge reason I'm putting this here is because, of course, it is the peak, the pomp, whatever the right word would be, there's that stupid word again, of Daniel Bryan trying to get into the WrestleMania 30 main event. And people, once again, are desperate for this. They are begging for this. They want it more than anything. This is when WWE decided, we're going to make him lose all the time, because they didn't know what the plan was. And I bet when this went down, they didn't think Daniel Bryan was going to be in that main event because they were so set on Batista versus Randy Orton. So I suppose it's kind of fun watching from that point of view because you can feel the heartbreak, but at the same time you are desperate for him to do something, and ultimately he doesn't get there. So I guess this is more of an historical moment. Right? It's like history written down on paper. It was so obvious what we were meant to do. And that's one of the reasons you should watch it when I put it here. It's just incredibly joyful to watch people want someone to win so badly and be fighting with management through the art form of professional wrestling. And it was a huge problem in WWE for this 5-year stretch where it became, we're not going to boo the characters, we're going to boo Vince McMahon and co, because you're not giving us what we want. I mean, we got there in the end, which is good. And it does make this super duper fun, but it's also a bit dumb. You also, though, have Cesaro and Sheamus totally wrecking people. Now, of course, they would become the bar based on the fact this is how they approach people. But this is a bit like Edge and Chris Jericho in that other match. You just watch them, you're like, maybe we should do more with these guys. They're really good. And Christian is the same. Now, we all know he is a great in-ring worker and an underrated in-ring worker. Go listen to his peers talk about him. But much like he's doing now in AEW, his character stuff is hilarious. He's just so good at being an absolute idiot when he wants to be. So that not only, helps stuff from a wrestling point of view, but the story and the funny stuff, he just brings it, man. He adds a whole different kettle of fish to this, which you don't get in other chamber matches. And then you have John Cena, who at this point was just the biggest star in the world, and he makes this feel important. The same with Randy Orton too, and obviously you get bits between Randy Orton and John Cena, which by this point also feels super duper big. So it's just easy to watch, and I suppose it goes to show how old we're all getting, because it is actually 11 years old. And even though I remember watching this, because they have all gone on to do different things, you do watch it now and it kind of does hit you in a nostalgic way, which certainly adds to the magic of it. But I just thought it was good. I really, really did. And when I was sort of laying them out, I kind of realized how much I enjoyed it because I kept nudging it up. Like it was 9, it was 8, and then it got to number 6. I think it's fair. When we move to number 5, which is super recent, because the Elimination Chamber 2019, which was Bray Wyatt versus AJ Styles versus Kofi Kingston versus Randy Orton versus Samoa Joe versus Jeff Hardy. I mean, there's a novelty given who's in it, given where they all are now again. But obviously this is the start of, well, not the start, but it's the midterm, I don't know what you call it, of Kofi Kingston heading to Kofi Mania. And the last two here are Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston. They go like 10 to 15 minutes before Daniel Bryan eventually is a massive dickhead and he gets the win. But it's awesome because we get to WrestleMania 35, that's right, and he finally gets his big win. I mean, WrestleMania 35 is way too long as an event, but everything from this point and all the trials and tribulations that Kofi had to go through, and the fact that at the time live, you're like, well, they're never going to do this because it's Kofi Kingston. I suppose it's very similar to the Bray Wyatt stuff in the sense you just want him to have his moment, and here it feels like it's been taken away from you. Now, again, if we hadn't got to WrestleMania 35 and got that awesome match, and Kofi Kingston winning the World Championship, this probably wouldn't have rated. But that does happen, and that does have an impact on your brain. And again, just seeing those two have that kind of a match, you are a bit like, why isn't Kofi Kingston in the main event more often? It's pretty flipping good. You also have Jeff Hardy just doing mad things. Like totally mad things. This is 2019, right? And I know his exit from WWE that time around was going to be weird, but it's the same for Samoa Joe. Like this, how nobody in WWE watched Samoa Joe here is like, guys, I think we need to push Samoa Joe more, like the Kofi Kingston stuff. He's just a monster, and he's the dude that is smashing fools. This one isn't as violent, as brutal as other ones on this, because again, it is 2019, which wasn't that too long ago. But there is some weird misses in this, and just seeing AJ Styles in it as well is awesome. And by this point, he had made himself a made man. Terrible sentence. in WWE. But again, Randy Orton is still in there too. It's just fun, right? It's just really, really fun. And I suppose this was the top guy crop of the last generation in many ways. So it got me again and made me stare off into the distance and think, damn it, I'm old. Moving on to number 4, it's the Elimination Chamber 2017, which is John Cena versus AJ Styles versus Bray Wyatt versus Dean Ambrose versus Baron Corbin versus The Miz. Now, I believe this is the first time we had the brand new Elimination Chamber, and it does kind of suck because your eyes aren't used to it, but also it's quite clearly nicer for them. Now, that's way more important than anything else. We talk about this all the time. Wrestler health and happiness first and foremost, but when you do watch back-to-back Elimination Chambers, you're more like, oh man, it looks a bit more bouncy. On a human level, I love it, but on a, I don't know, wrestler point of view fan dude, whatever that means, you are like, man, I really wanted to kick each other's ass, but that's because we have problems. What I really like about this one, though, is it moves super fast. Again, it's 2017, so we have entered a new, I don't know what word would be, but wrestling was just considered a little bit different. And they all understand that as well. And when Baron Corbin gets in there, he is allowed to kill people. Now, of course, this is before Constable Corbin and basically is based on the NXT version of Corbin. And maybe this should rank it lower, but it kind of made me mad. I was like, why didn't we capitalize on this more? Like, he is just throwing people around, and he comes across like the big guy of the match, and he is way bigger than people give him credit for. But it does feel like a missed opportunity. And the AJ Styles smashed through the plexiglass. Like, I understand this will become a common spot throughout the years. But that dude, man, there's a reason he's one of the best of all time. And it's because he throws himself into everything, and he never gives anything less than 100%. But it is disgusting. It is so sick. I don't really know how he walked away without an injury. And of course, the main reason I put this here is everything to do with Bray Wyatt. I mean, I don't know how I would feel about this match if what happened hadn't have happened, but it is tragic and it will have an impact on you. And seeing Bray Wyatt actually win, which was a huge surprise. I remember back in 2014, I was like, what? Bray Wyatt won? But seeing him get his moment, seeing him finally become champion after WWE had booked that character so badly. Obviously, it sucks. We get to WrestleMania and we can have the overhead projector match with sperm on the floor, whatever the flub that was. But it's just a nice moment. And that's really what I watch wrestling for. Like, it's probably not as good work-wise as some other ones that we haven't mentioned and other ones that we have mentioned. But again, it just got me, and it made me feel a bit emotional. You can call me a dweeb, you can call me a nerd. Those words are perfectly fair. But wouldn't it have been worse if the Eater of Worlds version of Bray Wyatt had never got this moment? So the fact he did get it just stood out to me. Moving on to number 3, though, is No Way Out 2009. Edge versus Jeff Hardy versus Triple H versus The Undertaker versus Vladimir Kozlov versus The Big Show. That's only because we also have to talk about number 2, which is also No Way Out 2009. John Cena versus Chris Jericho versus Rey Mysterio versus Mike Knox versus Kane versus Edge. That is because this is a 1-2 punch, and it could be the best story that WWE has ever told when they did have multiple elimination chambers. Because Edge enters the first one, which is the first one we talked about, which I believe was the SmackDown one. No, it was the Raw one. Then he snuck into the SmackDown one. But that's a story that I'm trying to tell you. Edge gets taken out super early, right? And he is the champion. Everyone was like, what the flub is that? What are we going to do? When he then beats up Kofi Kingston in order to get into the second one, which meant all of a sudden you're off your chair going, well, how the hell did he do that? I don't know what's going on. And he wins that one. So he goes in as one world champion and he comes out as another world champion, which sounds ridiculous. Sounds like Stars in Their Eyes if you've seen that dumb show. But he is also the guy that beats John Cena in the second one, which means John Cena is now no longer the champion, and Edge, this is where the whole ultimate opportunist thing really came into its own. And I think, and I'm guessing here, I didn't read anything online about it, I'm trying to remember my own thoughts. When Edge originally got taken out of the first one so quickly and as the champion, people were like, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. And I think they just assumed we did that to surprise people. It was a way to do it because we had this whole other elimination chamber that would negate it or at least balance it out. But no, we were going to have the thread running through it. So you have to have these as a 1-2 because it's so much fun. But there are other elements that you can take from it, right? Triple H and The Undertaker, when they get in, I think it was the Raw one, I can't remember. But the first one, number 3 on this list, even though you can switch these around. This was at a point where they just felt massive. I guess it's when WWE was trying to build new stars and not being massively successful. So when they get in there and they start duking it out, you just feel the atmosphere in the arena change. So that is pretty cool. You also have so many finishes, like it's WrestleMania 17, but it works. And I would argue it works better here than it does now because we've had an extra, when was this, 2009, so extra 16 years of it. So it was getting a bit laborious here, don't get me wrong, but they execute it well, so you get into it. And I suppose the only negative is that Triple H was going to win and go on to defend it against Randy Orton at WrestleMania. It did have a great build, but they dropped the ball. If you know, you know. If you don't know, we'll talk about it on a different video. With the second one, too, you have the ultimate balance because it's Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio who once again are like, oh, we're really good at this wrestling stuff, so we're going to do that for you. And when John Cena goes out, this place doesn't know what to do. It's not as big as The Undertaker losing at WrestleMania 30, but it has that sort of vibe where like, what? what? What do we do now? And the fact that Edge gets in there, it's just really good sports entertaining. If you were going to watch these in a bubble or without the context, there are definitely better Elimination Chamber matches from bell to bell. But in terms of madness, nonsense, and twists you don't see coming, I had to put this at 3 and 2. It's still so flipping good. And also, again, it's 16 years old. We can probably do it again. Which means number 1 is the Survivor Series 2002. Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Kane, Booker T, and Chris Jericho. Now, it really is because I remember watching this, even though I was basically a fetus, and the Elimination Chamber was scarier than going to detention at school. It looked horrible. You could see that it had been built to wound these people because it was like solid metal. So there was a real danger to it. And of course, I much prefer it today when we're taking precautions because I don't want anybody to die. But that's what this one felt like. But when you are watching it both then and now, it does give you the heebie-jeebies. It's also the first one, right? So it feels like a new gimmick and it feels fresh and it has the novelty to it, especially because everyone goes in there and they're like, man, we've got to sell this as hard as possible, which they do. And the only real shame is Shawn Michaels is in those awful unfinished wrestling tights. He has talked about this. There was a problem with the seamstress or I don't know, but he's basically wearing, well, they're poo-colored pants. I don't know, take it up with him. This is when Kane is totally massive, so he feels horrendous as well. And the fact that Booker T in it is good, because again, it's 2002. He'd only been in the company around about a year, maybe just shy of that. So putting him in the main event does work, and it's hard to take away from the fact that Shawn Michaels was going to win, and it was going to be his last ever WWE Championship victory. And that does mean something. And I think because everybody realizes that going in, the back end especially, it becomes really fun. It's like move, 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 go, go, go. And the final sweet chin music does make you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then of course he would come full circle all the way back at WrestleMania 24 when he retired Ric Flair, or whenever that was. So it probably is just because this is the only one where WWE and the commentators, the presentation, you get a big video with the music, dun, 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 make you feel like you should be absolutely terrified of this thing. So once again, I guess it just ties into the narrative. You're meant to feel a little bit intimidated. They feel intimidated. Therefore you feel intimidated, and after this you were just going to get used to it, to the point even now it's been so watered down just from our brains, even though I bet the WWE superstars that do get in there like, okay, well, it may be better, but it still absolutely sucks, so maybe you should put a sock in it, which I would totally agree with. But yeah, when I got to 2002, when I started with it, when I started watching these, it just had something to it. It could be why the Hell in a Cell from 1997, Bad Blood, Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, is still my favorite. We hadn't tried to gimmick it too much. We hadn't had to be overly creative. We could just use the structure as part of the, what are you going to do now? And it works, man. Sometimes the simple way is the best. Now listen, there's going to be Elimination Chambers I haven't talked about. Drop them in the comments below, and of course reorder mine. I don't know what I'm talking about. Click the video on the screen for more content from this idiot. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. And please do click the notification bell. And look, if you wanted to fitness supplements, I go to the gym and I use Gorilla Mind, and they're so nice they gave me a code. If you go to gorillamind.com/Simon, use code Simon, you could get 10% off. I promise you it's worth it. Also come follow me at social media, Simon316, Cameo, Pro Wrestling Tees, and all these things, TikTok. They're all down there in the description. Give it a click, give me a follow. I'll try to entertain you and distract you from this crazy world as best as I can, but otherwise, keep enjoying wrestling, my friends. I'll see you soon.